Good evening, everyone. My name is Miles Viecher. I'm the Assistant Director of Pre-Orientation and Operations and New Student and Family Programs at American University. Thank you for joining us tonight for this Eagle Families webinar. We're very happy to have the AU Abroad office with us tonight. And with us, we have Ethan Merritt with the AU Abroad office. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to him, and he will go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Miles. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks, everyone. My name's Ethan Merritt. I'm the Associate Director at AU Abroad. I've been at AU Abroad for a long time. I've been working at AU Abroad for over 20 years, actually. Study abroad has been a big part of my life personally and professionally, really ever since I was the age of your students that'll be at AU, hopefully in the near future. I'm very happy to talk about study abroad tonight and about the AU Broad program, something of which we're very proud of here at AU. So I have a presentation. I don't think this presentation will go the full hour, so we should have plenty of time to address questions you might have. So as Miles might have mentioned, as I go along, please go ahead and put in questions in the Q&A, and we'll definitely have some substantial time at the end to kind of cover those questions. I want to make sure that I address as many questions you might have as possible, right? So let's get going about AU Abroad. So, a few quick facts about us. Now, hopefully, as you might know, AU is pretty well known for study abroad. In fact, I would say the majority of students who choose to come to AU chose AU in part because of the nationally ranked study abroad program we have. This past year in U.S. News and World Report, we were ranked number fourth in the country in terms of best study abroad program. We've been as high as number two in the country before. So we're always, over the past several years, we're always kind of floating in that top five range. And that just speaks to, I think, something that is a hallmark of AU, and that is global experiences. Study abroad is just a big part of the culture at AU. And it's something that has widespread support across the university. It's not just something that, you know, me and my colleagues in the study abroad office encourage students to do. But you really have the president of the university, the provost of the university, faculty, academic departments, academic advisors. Everyone is very eager and supportive of wanting students to have this experience as part of their time at AU and see it as being something very important. And that culture is really built up over the years to be where we are now, where it's number fourth in the country. Almost 60% of AU students will do some kind of study abroad before they leave AU, which is one of the highest participation rates in the country, right? I mean, nationally, something like 10% of college students nationally study abroad, right? So I think we lose sight of the fact sometimes about um, how somewhat unique this strength area is for AU. And speaking of programs, one of the hardest decisions your student might have to make is deciding where to go, because we have a lot of great programs, and we have over 100 programs in 30 different countries around the world. These are semester, year-long summer programs. We have, several different options for students depending on what their desires are, what their schedule is, what they're looking to do. Something that is also quite unique about AU and AU abroad is when you look at the trends nationally in terms of study abroad. Over the past, 10, 15 years, study abroad has been growing significantly, in terms of study abroad participation. Again, nationally, it's still quite low, as only 10% of college students, but still, that's been growing rapidly over the past decade. But in recent years, the trends, if you look at a lot of other universities and colleges and where that growth in study abroad has often come from, it's often come from in terms of short programs, like short week-long or two-week trips, faculty-led trips, for example, short-term programs. That's nationally where a lot of the growth in study abroad has been. And while AU does have those opportunities as well, we have summer programs, we have some excellent short-term faculty-led programs. The vast majority of AU students study abroad for a semester. And in fact, and indeed, our numbers for doing a full academic year study abroad, 2 semesters, is also very high relative to our peers. So that's also something that we're also, I think, kind of pleased about, that study abroad at AU, we have a variety of options for students, but the focus has really been on a longer term study abroad, longer duration, just to give students that much more of an immersive experience. And again, another major misnomer that we try and communicate to students about is that Study abroad is not just for international relations majors. We have study abroad programs, AU abroad program options, literally for every single major at AU. So there should be no academic barrier to study abroad. That's something that our office has worked very closely with the different academic departments and schools at AU over the years to make sure that any student who wants to study abroad can do so, regardless of their major. So that's a key point I wanted to stress. The other major misnomer that's often out there is this perception that, well, I don't speak a foreign language, so I'm not sure study abroad is for me, or I don't speak a foreign language, so I guess like I really can only go to the UK or Australia, right? And that's also a big no. So the true answer is the vast majority of programs we have, even in non-English speaking countries, there is no language requirement, and that's because with these programs on the campuses or on the programs, the courses are taught in English, the programs are run in English or at least co-run in English. So there is no barrier as far as that's concerned. So we have students studying abroad all the time in places like Japan, Korea, Italy, you name it. And they don't necessarily have a lot of language background necessarily, right? So that's something else I think is very important to understand as well. It's really only certain programs we have primarily in the French and Spanish speaking world that might have a language prerequisite where students need a certain level of language in order to do the program. And I'm going to be talking about a lot of different programs and kinds of programs over the course of this presentation. But I just wanted to highlight very quickly that among these 100 programs we have, right, we something else we're very proud about is we have actually AU has three centers abroad in Brussels, Madrid, and Nairobi. And these are special AU centers with our own AU staff and faculty and program directors where a lot of our study abroad program is focused and built out. We have a lot of really cool programs that we focus on at those three centers. So those are particularly popular and particularly strong options for a lot of students, depending on their major at AU. And we do a lot of exciting things at those three locations. But by no means are those three locations only where we have study abroad, like I said. So over 30 countries, over 100 programs. So chances are, if there's a part of the world your student is interested in going to, we probably have a program option there in most cases. So I've kind of been touching upon this already as well, as far as like how we view study abroad at AU, right? And these are really kind of like our kind of like guiding lights in terms of goals as far as what we want study abroad to be for AU students. And first off, as I mentioned, is an immersive learning experience. So we really like to ideally focus on programs that are of a longer duration and length, summer, semester, academic year, to really give a student a deep immersion into a single cultural environment. So that's something that's very, very important for us, regardless of what program we design or we set up for students as part of the AU Broad program. The other overriding goal we have as well is equitable access and affordability. So I'm going to be talking a bit later much more about financing study abroad and how that works. But much as I said how we don't want there to be any academic barrier for study abroad, likewise, we don't want there to be, and there should not be, any financial barrier for study abroad. So reducing those barriers to making sure that students, regardless of background or major, have access to study abroad opportunities. That's very important to us. The third key goal is academic integration. So this is again something that we're very proud of at AU, and we worked, I think, very hard in these past many years. Is when you look at some other colleges and universities across the U.S., study abroad is sometimes perceived as being kind of like a semester off or just something extracurricular a student does for fun, not really that connected with their academics back at their home university. And it's the opposite for us at AU. We very much view study abroad as being integrated into their curriculum at AU. We want it to be a core part of their AU experience, not something they do just on the side as like a semester off, as I said. This is something that when students study abroad, they are receiving full AU academic credit for whatever they're taking abroad on their program. So all courses, credits, and grades they would do on an AU broad program fully come back to their AU transcript, to their AU record, can count towards degree requirements, major requirements at AU. So that is a key, I think another key aspect of our long-term success in study abroad at AU is the fact that it's it's not only experientially but academically a part of what it means to be an AU student. And students learn, they develop academic skills and knowledge in their first year or two at AU, and then they take that knowledge with them on a study abroad program, and they learn maybe those same things from a very different perspective, or new aspects of what they were learning back home at AU, and that informs them, enriches their experience, and they come back to AU from studying abroad with that new perspective that they gained. I mean, it's cliche to say, but study abroad, is life changing. And I'm sure for many of you on this call right now who might have studied abroad back when you were a student, you probably recall how life changing it was for you as well. And that experience informs their academics back at AU. And when you have so many students kind of studying abroad and coming back to campus, that enriches the academic environment for everyone on campus. If students are in classes at AU with international students who might be studying at AU from abroad, and from their peers who might have just gotten back from abroad with a whole wealth of experiences they want to share with their peers and classmates. Uh, it just makes for a very, I think, intellectually stimulating environment. And study abroad is a big part of that and contributor towards that. And finally, this is where our office comes into play very heavily for students and making sure students get personalized student guidance. So we have an excellent team of AU Abroad advisors, and from day one, we're meeting with students individually. So even before a student can apply to a program, they're required to meet with an individual appointment with an AU Broad advisor, because we know that for every student's different. Every student has different needs, different academic needs, different interests, different personal concerns. Maybe there might be health concerns, things like that. Whatever it might be, we want to make sure students are getting the information they need and making the best decision for themselves about where best to study abroad, where and when and how. We want to help students throughout that whole process from day one up until they're abroad and they come back from abroad, right? And the other key aspect I think, important to stress with AU is that study abroad, as I mentioned, has been becoming increasingly a core part of what we view as being the AU experience and a core aspect of being a student at AU. And there are a lot of reasons for that, many of which I kind of have already articulated: the academic benefits, the cultural immersion benefits a student will have, the growth the student will have in doing a study abroad program. But there's also kind of practical career benefits, right? So that there's actually been recent studies done that show that study abroad is connected. Students who do study abroad, global experiences, there are direct links to career outcomes and what happens after they graduate university. So just to kind of illustrate some facts here, as you can see, that the kinds of experiences students have abroad really serve them very well long term. And indeed, 90% of alumni link study abroad to their career success, link their study abroad experience to having a core, being a huge driver and influence on maybe what they decide to do post graduation, what their career ends up being. So again, these experiences should not be seen as something superfluous or just something for fun. It's a core part of being at AU. And a college experience is needs to be both an amazing campus experience, academic experience with top-notch classes and academics, and that's what AU has. But it also needs to be providing students opportunities to experience things and learn things outside the classroom. And study abroad is a key aspect of that. So just a quick little snapshot of the timeline. And I kind of, this presentation is a little bit like, almost like how I would present information to a student to some degree. I thought that'd be kind of, useful for you all to see. But from a timeline perspective, right? Generally speaking, right, students are typically not studying abroad their first year at AU. Now, the one caveat to that statement is that very exciting option we have called the Cornerstone program, which I'm going to talk about a little later on this presentation. So there's a very, very cool, very unique opportunity called the Cornerstone program where students can study abroad as part of the special cohort program where they study abroad in their first year. But that special program aside, generally speaking, students are always spending their first year at AU, and that's very intentional. So the idea is that letting students get to know being at AU, get to know Washington D.C. For many students, coming to Washington D.C. itself might be a big cultural adjustment, cultural experience, right? So giving students time to really adjust to AU, figure out what their academic interests are, figure out, start to explore what they might want their major to be, things like that. And at that stage, we're asking students to kind of explore, to explore our AU Broad website, which has tons of information, details about all the different programs we offer, coming to different events and sessions we might have throughout the year to learn about study abroad, and starting to maybe chat about study abroad with their academic advisor. So a core part of this experience, like I said, part of why we try and make it as easy as possible for students to study abroad here at AU is that our office at AU Broad works very closely with the academic advising offices here at AU as well. So that basically academic advisors know that from day one, when they're sitting down with students and going over their 4-year degree plan and what has to happen when, that academic advisor probably is already penciling in a study abroad experience somewhere. And they're going to, and so students can, even early on at this freshman year stage, they can be talking to their advisor about, roughly when might be studying abroad might be the best window for them based on their academic plan. And then that planning really kind of accelerates in their sophomore year. That's really when they're likely probably making big decisions on finalizing decisions on their major, when they want to study abroad, what programs, and probably spending a lot more time meeting with individual AU broad advisors like myself as well to learn more about specific programs and really start to narrow in on where it is they want to go. Where is the location that's best suited for them based on their personal interests and academic goals? And then they would go abroad. And again, typically students are applying this semester prior to when they want to go, right? And we'll talk more about the application process in a bit. So that's kind of what the time frame looks like. So it's not what I wanted to kind of stress here in this timeline is that it's not necessarily a rush for students, right? They shouldn't feel rushed. Um, they have time to figure things out, and we want them to figure things out coming to AU. We understand that study abroad, there's lots of things to discover. Personally, academically, there's things like internships they might want to do. So there's a lot for college students these days to juggle. And so we understand that. Everyone at AU understands that, and we want to support students in planning things out as best they can, and try and provide some fairly smooth, relatively, trouble-free pathways to when they can do what. Things like studying abroad, things like maybe doing an internship, etc. Where can I study abroad? So as I started off in this presentation, right, the hardest choice a student might have is deciding where to go because we just have so many great programs. I mean, some students might come to AU and they know from day one, I, I've known since I was a child, I've wanted to study abroad in Japan, and that's great. Some students know exactly where they want to go. And then we can have a very targeted discussion about how we make that happen. And here are the actual specific programs in Japan you can consider. Um, Other students, total opposite end of the spectrum. I just know I want to go abroad. I have no idea where. It all sounds awesome. Please help me. And we're here for that too, right? And so it's really anywhere in that range is perfectly fine. We want to meet students where they're at and helping them choose where best to go, and really try and contextualize how do they go about making this decision? Because it arguably could be one of the more major decisions they make during their time at AU is choosing where to study abroad, how long, etc. So we want to make sure that we're helping them as much as possible with that. And the way we often frame it is, okay, we've got all these different programs. How do you possibly decide where you want to go abroad? Obviously, the unspoken first way to decide is, as I've kind of alluded to before, is location preference. Some students know they want to go to Japan. Some students know they want to go to London. Some students know they want to go to Rome. And that's clear for them. But other students it may not be, right? And they're open to different locations. And so a key criteria then becomes, okay, what are your academic interests and or needs? And what programs are going to work for those academic interests? Because not every program can serve every major or academic need. If your student's a business major, there are some programs that have some of the best business departments in the world, and there are some programs that have no business courses whatsoever, right? So having your student understand early on, and this is where I mentioned I mentioned kind of even as early as in their first year, starting to talk with their academic advisor about study abroad and how that fits into their academic schedule for their major and for their degree. It's never too early to kind of start to have those discussions because the earlier a student starts to plan their academic schedule with their advisor, the more they might be able to line up even greater flexibility for themselves. So, I mean, it's not uncommon at AU where a student does multiple study abroad programs. They might do a summer program and a semester program. They might do a full year abroad in one location, so 2 semesters abroad, or they might do one semester, one program, one semester somewhere else. And because they've been talking and working with their academic advisor early on in their planning degree planning process, their advisor might work with them to line up, you know, 1 or 2 semesters in their junior year, for example, where they really have a lot of flexibility as far as what their course needs are. And they can safely study abroad for 2 semesters and still stay fully on track, right? And doesn't it's not going to like delay their graduation or things like that because that's obviously something would want to avoid for a student is making sure that none of this would in any way jeopardize their academic plan and schedule and graduation plans. So yeah, talking with us, talking with your academic advisor early on about goals, and then understanding what their course needs are. So this is where our office, our advisors, and the academic advisors and the student, there's kind of a three-way conversation that starts to happen here, where a student understands from their advisor, listen, you can study abroad fall semester of your junior year, no problem. But you need to make sure that when you go abroad, that you take at least, these 2 courses for your major. Maybe it doesn't matter what they are. It just needs to be maybe 2 classes for your major. It needs to be, you need to have at least one 300 level economics class or so once a student has that information, then we can start to work with them on, okay, hey, identifying what programs are going to have those kinds of courses they need. So again, to make sure that students are not making the wrong decisions about study abroad programming and whatever they choose in terms of study abroad is not going to somehow, again, cause problems for their academic schedule. And I'm gonna do a shout out to our website again later, but our AU Broad website is really a huge clearinghouse of information. So it's just auabroad.american.edu. We have lots of great information that I think many of you would find very interesting. We have whole sections of the website for safety and health, for example. But there's also a section specifically called My Major in Study Abroad, for students, where students can go to that section of our website and by major, we have specific pages where there's some guidance for their major for going abroad and some suggested programs for that major. So again, if students aren't really sure where to start, that's a really nice way to start, is just to kind of get some ideas about, hey, here are some programs that we know are not the only ones you could do for your major, but are suggestions, starting points for your major. Okay, so location preferences, where does a student really want to go? Academic interests and needs and what programs have the courses that will work best for those academic needs. The third big criteria we talk to students about is, and this is not maybe something that is not necessarily top of mind for most students, is understanding program types. You could broadly categorize all AU broad programs into kind of 2 general categories. What we call sometimes structured style programs and then direct enrollment or like university style programs. So what does this mean? Structured style programs the best way to explain them is it's more of a cohort kind of experience. So these are specialized programs that are specifically designed for study abroad students. And so study abroad students are on these programs together as a cohort, living and taking classes together as part of this program cohort experience. So I'll mention these again later, but our 3 centers I mentioned before, remember the AU Brussels, Madrid, and Nairobi centers. These are probably arguably the best examples we have of a structured style program. Students are studying at our program center in Brussels as part of a 30, 40 student cohort of other AU students doing the program. These structured programs tend to have more specific academic focuses to them. Specific course offerings, specific academic themes are for them. So, for example, the Brussels program, it's all about the EU and NATO. It's called the EU in Action program. So, students on the Brussels program, just as an example, at our center in Brussels, take a kind of a set list of courses that are all about the EU and NATO and how these organizations got developed over time and what's happening now in current events. Um, and then as well, right, these programs tend to also include other kinds of experiential components built into the experience. So organized excursions and field trips that students do together as part of the program. Oftentimes there might be an organized internship experience as part of the program. So this is a big thing sometimes students don't realize is, you know, students often come to AU wanting to both study abroad and do an internship. Those are two big strength areas for AU, I would say. These things can be done often at the same time because we have amazing study abroad programs that will have an internship experience as part of the program that is organized for the student. An internship is arranged for the student based on their interests by our program staff as part of these kinds of structured program experiences. And again, Brussels is a good example, or Nairobi, for example, right, where students are doing, or actually all students on the program will do an internship that's arranged for them by the program staff. It's a credit-bearing internship as part of the program experience. And then these kinds of structured programs, again, by nature, because it's more of a cohort, there are specific staff and faculty and support staff that are there to help that cohort. So it's a highly supportive environment, right? The programs will have their own dedicated staff for this cohort of 30 or 40 students, right? So that's one kind of experience, right? That can work very well for many students. And I mentioned again, I highlighted our three AU centers as being prime examples of these kinds of structured programs. Our centers are not the only programs that are like this. That we have several other structured style programs in other parts of the world. So like our programs in Beijing and Shanghai, in Taiwan, we have one of our programs in London is like this. One of our programs in Prague is like this, right? So there are other locations that are of this model. On the other side, the other broad type of program is direct enrollment style programs. And arguably, these might be actually the majority of AU broad programs. When you look at our big list of, 100 programs, this is actually probably the majority. And these are programs where students are, in fact, directly studying and integrating at a foreign university. So it's where AU has a partnership with a top tier university overseas. So the London School of Economics, Oxford, University of Edinburgh, John Cabot University in Rome, Waseda University in Tokyo, you name it, right? We all these amazing universities where we have a link with them where our students can go directly study at that university, fully integrate there on the campus, live and study and take classes right alongside local students there, as well as, of course, other international study abroad students like themselves from all over the world in that kind of integrated fashion in a university environment. So these programs by nature, in many ways, are a bit more of an independent experience. They're not necessarily kind of a cohort experience. Students might be one of many study abroad students going to these universities. They might be one of, you know, a handful of other AU students studying abroad at that university. Once they arrive, they'll be part of a group of many other dozens and dozens of other study abroad students from different schools and different countries around the world. But that's not really part of a cohort. They'll have like a special study abroad student orientation when they arrive. There might be a study abroad student, there's a study abroad student support office there for them. But beyond that, these programs are much more hands-off, right? The idea is that they want a student to really have the experience of integrating into that student population, to that campus environment, take classes there, and kind of what a student does outside of class is really much more up to them. Get involved on campus, join clubs, activities, all kinds of things they can take part in, but it's more up to the student to, in a way, shape that experience a bit more on their own. So these programs are great for students who really want that kind of experience, who maybe really want to be integrating and studying right alongside local students of that country or city, who really, for example, want, for certain academic areas, this might work great. Let's say a student is double majoring as they have a psychology major and they're a political science major, both, and they need to take classes in both areas. These kinds of programs work very well for that because a student is studying at an actual university that's going to have a variety of academic departments where they could take classes across those different departments. So especially STEM students who are in the sciences, these programs work perfectly. Studying abroad at a top tier university in Australia or New Zealand or Scotland for a biology student, or a physics student, where they can take these classes, these science classes at these amazing world-class universities, right? So it's something we talk through students quite a bit because the kind of program a student decides to do also plays a big role in the kind of experience they have. And so it's not something I think students necessarily think about right away is what kind of program speaks to them and sounds more like what they're looking for. Okay, a big question that students often have is about finances, and I'm sure you all have similar questions too. And this also speaks a little bit to one of the other big, I'd say, misnomers about study abroad that we're trying to constantly dispel at AU Broad, and that is the perception that study abroad is just something that's a luxury, that it's just something that's unaffordable for some students, that it's too expensive. And really, it's only students who are wealthy or have a lot of money can really afford to do something like that. And that's something that's a perception we really, like I said, really try and combat and dispel, like, because that indeed is not the case. When students study abroad on any AU abroad program, they remain fully registered at AU as a full-time student. They are getting full AU credit towards their AU degree, like I mentioned. So therefore, students are paying their AU tuition just like they normally do through their AU account. So the payment plan process just continues like usual. And therefore, all the financial aid that they receive through AU as their part of their financial aid package would apply towards study abroad just like usual. The only exceptions to that are if they have a work study award, because they're not going to be on campus for a work study job, obviously. And then if students have any like GI Bill or veterans related benefits, those can be sometimes be problematic for study abroad as well. But otherwise, all other aspects of financial aid would apply to a study abroad as usual, right? And then beyond that, there's additional study abroad related scholarships out there. There's a special need-based AU abroad grant that students can apply for through our office. There's also a fairly decent range of outside study abroad related scholarships. So we have kind of a sister office here at AU, the Office of Merit Awards, that helps students to apply for some of these outside national study abroad scholarships. And AU actually has been a top sender, a top recipient for these study abroad scholarships. So awards like the Gilman or the Boren, these are very prestigious national study abroad scholarships that are pretty substantial in terms of size that a lot of AU students have had success in getting. So again, not only are they getting their regular financial aid and scholarship, but there might be even additional scholarships on top of that they absolutely could apply for and would qualify for. And I mentioned again how they're paying AU tuition just like normal, whether they're on campus or whether they're doing an AU broad program, and they're getting their financial aid like normal. The differences in cost then come with when they're studying abroad, they're not paying AU housing and dining, obviously, on top of AU tuition. They're paying AU tuition, yes, but instead they're paying some kind of housing program fee slash housing cost for the abroad program they're going to. And in many cases, cost of living, cost of housing can be significantly cheaper abroad than it is in Washington, D.C., right? So, depending on where students want to go, it might actually, in terms of total overall costs, it might actually even economically work out in their favor to study abroad. So, as I mentioned before, there should not be a financial barrier for a student to do a study abroad program through AU Abroad. And that's something that if students ever have any budgetary concerns or financial concerns, that's something else we absolutely want to work with a student individually on about making sure they understand what the costs are and are there particular locations or programs that might work better for what their budget, what their budget limitations are, things like that. Maybe a student decides maybe you don't study abroad right smack in downtown London. Maybe instead you choose to study abroad someplace in a smaller city not far from London, or where the cost of living might be significantly less, for example, right? So these are conversations we can have with students depending on what their individual circumstances are. And we have detailed program cost sheets on our AU Broad website where we break out what is AU charge and what are their own estimated other expenses. Like what is average airfare? What is average food budget for a semester in that place? What's the average housing cost to go to that program, et cetera, et cetera. So requirements for study abroad. So another question students often have is when can I do this, or am I allowed when am I allowed to do it, and is there a reason why I wouldn't be allowed to do it? And generally speaking, right, 90% of AU abroad programs are not competitive. So applying for study abroad is not like applying to college again all over again, where they have to apply to like 10 different programs and to keep their fingers crossed and see what happens. No, in most cases, the vast majority of programs we have are not competitive, so that as long as students meet these baseline requirements, and as long as they put together a good application and they apply on time and they do what they're supposed to do, there should be no reason why they would not be accepted. So it's more about we want students to really think about put the thought in advance and work with us on this on deciding, okay, where do I really want to go? What is that program I really want to do? And come to a decision that we help them come to that decision. What is that program that is the best fit? And then students apply to that one program. with the safe assumption that they'd be getting in, provided again they meet these kinds of requirements. So again, trying to make study abroad not a stressful situation. It's more about where's helping a student to decide where is best for them, helping them through the application process, and as long as they meet these requirements, there should be no concern in terms of getting to a program. We really only have a handful of programs that are considered competitive, maybe because of like capacity limitations or and in those cases we allow students to apply to like a one backup program if they happen to be applying to one of the few competitive programs we have. Like Oxford, for example. That's a good example. The program we have at Oxford University is only a small handful of students. There's only a space for a small handful of students to do that program. So that's where there could be a competitive situation, just depending on how many students we have applying for the program. And this kind of the last bullet point relates to when a student can study abroad. So as I mentioned, and generally speaking, for most students, their second semester of their sophomore year is typically the earliest semester they could study abroad. Um, and some students do that. Some students will study abroad as early as spring semester of their sophomore year. But I would say the majority of students often study abroad, most commonly sometime in their junior year. And also occasionally their senior year too. So we have a lot of first semester seniors, for example, study abroad. And that's, I think, just because that will somewhat depend on just individual students' majors and academic schedules. For some majors, they they might have specific course criteria they want students to do on campus before they would approve a study abroad. And that's why oftentimes for most students, it's going to be the junior year when students are studying abroad because they're busy in their sophomore year, maybe taking care of some of those core required courses for their major that they've chosen. But summer programs a student can do as early as the summer right after freshman year. So there's more flexibility as far as when students can do a summer study abroad experience. So circling back to what I kind of mentioned in the very beginning, like there's usually students don't study abroad in their first year, except for a really cool unique opportunity we have through AU called the Cornerstone Program. And maybe some of you have heard this already from some other literature from AU or information you've heard from AU admission staff, or basically it's a specialized cohort program that students do in their first year at AU. Either their very first fall semester, their very first semester at AU, they might study abroad in Spain, or if they want to do their spring semester of their first year. So they start at AU in the fall as a freshman, and then the second semester, the spring semester of their freshman year, they study abroad in Ireland as part of this Cornerstone program. So we have these two unique locations. And this is where, again, students are doing a specialized program that is, again, very much a specialized cohort experience with a lot of layers of support. Because as you can imagine, students are studying abroad quite early in their college career. This might be, of course, something very new for most students to be doing, to be going overseas. So there's a lot of oversight and guidance given to these students, both before they go and once they arrive on site, right? And then students who do these special cornerstone programs in their freshman year, um, earn credit towards their degree. So they're satisfying AU core required courses. And it really, I think one of the strengths of this kind of cornerstone experiences is it really from the get-go, from day one, from their first year, they're establishing a great cohort. I mean, they really bond with the students that do this experience with them. And that bond, that cohort really carries forward during the rest of their time at AU. So there's two different these cornerstone pathways. For students who might, if any of your students are going to be an SIS major, an SIS student, which is our School of International Service, right? We have our specialized Madrid SIS Scholars Cornerstone program in the fall. So this is the pathway for students who might want to do a fall semester, their very first semester abroad at our AU Center in Madrid on this Cornerstone program. And so as you can see here, there's all kind they do these really cool trips with our program director in Spain, these amazing excursions. They get to live in a residence hall together with the other students and get to interact with Spanish university students as well. Um, but again, this specific pathway is for intended SIS majors. And then for students who want to study abroad in the spring of their sophomore year, we have this cornerstone program in Dublin at the University College Dublin, which is one of our long-standing, very close partners we have there in Dublin. UCD, University College Dublin, has a beautiful campus. It's located just outside the city center of Dublin, very accessible by public transportation. And this also is just they have a wide range of experience of having these kinds of first year programs, cohort programs, where they put on a great experience for students. Students take classes, but then also do these really cool excursions throughout Ireland as part of the experience. So again, not for every student perhaps, but for a student who really wants something like this to happen right away as part of their first year at AU, we have these two pathways. And right in that red box there on this slide here, my colleague Courtney Glover, she's actually the associate director of all of our AU centers. She actually is also the main advisor and contact point for everything Cornerstone for these students, for these Cornerstone abroad options. So feel free to shoot an email to her anytime. Her information is on our website as well, and she'd be happy to work with you to answer any questions you have about the Cornerstone experience. Shout out to our AU Abroad website. So again, auabroad.american.edu. Please take a look at it, spend some time. There's lots of great information there on all manner of topics. I think you'll find it quite interesting and other ways to connect with us. So again, if you have more questions moving forward, please feel free to reach out to us anytime. You can email if you think of a question later tonight or tomorrow you forgot to ask, feel free to send an email to our office with that question. Just reference the webinar from tonight, and I'm happy to respond back to you personally to address any questions you might have moving forward as well. And on that note, that is the presentation.
All right. Thank you so much, Ethan. That was a very informative and in-depth presentation that you provided. So now we're going to switch over to Q&A. So I've pulled up the Q&A queue, and let's see what questions we have.
I got it
So
here
there's
too. Yep.
one. It says, how many of the summer Madrid program are from AU versus other universities?
Good question. So basically there's a range of answers to this question. So for our AU centers, the ones I mentioned in Madrid, Brussels, and Nairobi, those predominantly are AU student cohorts. So usually most students on that program are going to be like 30, 40 other AU students together on that program. Um, no, but that's actually typically just our centers. Other programs we have, other structured programs, obviously the direct enroll university programs, there'll be potentially a mix of lots of other study abroad students from various different US universities and maybe other parts of the world as well. But for our AU center specifically in Madrid, Brussels, and Nairobi, those are primarily AU student cohorts.
Awesome. Thank you. Um, our next question is, um, sorry, I'm going to start with the oldest. What rules apply when students are studying abroad? Are students held to the AU Code of Conduct or the rules of the host institution?
Great question, Jennifer. Yeah. So basically, the short answer is yes to both, right? Basically, so the rules that for students studying abroad are largely the rules that they would have to be at AU as well. So they are still registered AU students when they do an AU abroad program. So they still are under the AU Student Code of Conduct. So that those same expectations apply. And then similarly, they would need to follow the specific policies and regulations of the host institution or abroad program they're attending as well. Because some programs might have specific other kinds of rules. Like if for example, students who study abroad in Nairobi, they're not allowed to travel outside of Kenya or outside of, for various reasons, they can't travel outside of the country for this during the duration of the program. So every program might have some of their own specific rules and regulations that have to be followed. I wouldn't say these are, it's nothing too dramatic, right? These aren't like super onerous or heavy duty rules and restrictions that are on students that wouldn't be much different from what they're used to be here at AU as an AU student.
So someone says that their son usually takes 15 credits each semester. However, SPA shows that only 9 AU abroad credits can be applied towards their major. So how would this work for them to be able to graduate on time?
Yeah, great question. And that's also sometimes this can be a point of confusion for the students as well, where there's two distinctions to be made here. One is the amount of total AU credit they're getting for the abroad program experience. And then of that total credit they're receiving, how many credits could count towards their major specifically? So this is very common for a lot of students. Most students, when they're studying abroad, are typically taking a full 15 AU credits or the equivalent on their abroad program. So they're getting a full semester of AU credit coming back to their AU degree when they do an AU abroad program. But not all of those credits typically are allowed to apply towards the major, right? So some schools might have like requirements where like only 6 credits abroad can count towards the major, or only 9 credits in some cases can count towards the major. Students still get the other credit. It just would come back as elective credits, or maybe they could maybe take some courses towards their minor, right? Or maybe take courses towards a double major they might have. So they're getting that full semester of AU credit, right? There just might be limitations on how much of it can count for the major specifically. But that's part of the discussion with the advisor about, I mentioned kind of that academic plan, like making sure like how does study abroad fit into their academic schedule. The advisor will work with your student about, okay, for that semester you go abroad, you only need to take 2 classes for your major. So they arrange the schedule the other semesters that a student's going to be here on campus so that to allow for that time abroad where it's okay. It's okay if a student does just 2 courses for their major. In fact, a lot of times I work with students who, when they go abroad, they're able to take all of their classes as electives. They've some students, let's say a student, they're a chemistry major, but it's been their lifelong dream to study abroad in Japan. Our programs in Japan unfortunately don't have any chemistry courses. But a student works things out with their schedule with their advisor, where they in their schedule they give themselves one semester where they have a window to go abroad and they don't need anything for their chemistry major. They can just focus on elective requirements for their AU degree, something towards their minor, like I said, what have you. So that's where it really comes down by student by student.
Ethan, so you mentioned that in terms of finances,
Yeah.
students are ch charged tuition as if they were attending AU,
Yep.
but international schools may have cheaper tuition. So if they're cheaper, does the student save money?
Yeah, it's a great question. So this kind of speaks a little bit to how study abroad is handled by a lot of different private universities across the US. Different US universities, it's not really always apples to apples in terms of how US universities handle study abroad. There are some US universities where study abroad is kind of like a semester off, where students may just be kind of going to some outside study abroad program. They're not paying their home university tuition. They're just going to some outside study abroad program, and they get approval for transfer credit to come back into their home university from that outside university or program. But the credits transferring in typically can't count towards their major or major degree requirements, for example, right? So that's one model, for example. Then there's lots of other US universities, AU included, that follow what we call a home university tuition model, where when students do an AU abroad program, they remain fully registered at AU as a full-time student, right? They're getting full in-residence AU credit towards their AU degree from the AU abroad program. So it's not coming in as like transfer credit from XYZ place, right? It's full credit going towards AU degree requirements. And therefore, because students are getting full in-residence AU credit towards their degree requirements, students will pay AU tuition just like they normally do. They would not pay any tuition to the host institution or overseas university, right? They just pay the regular AU tuition like normal. And that's also what allows for all students' financial aid to apply like normal. So because a student is still registered at AU, paying AU tuition like normal, that's what enables all the financial aid and scholarships and everything to also apply like normal as well. So that's why a lot of private universities all over the country operate study abroad in this manner, because it's a way for courses and credits done overseas on the study abroad program to fully work into their degree, and for financial aid to still apply and everything like that, because you're still registered at AU, paying the AU tuition as usual.
How are accommodations handled in study abroad programs?
So accommodations, I assume you might potentially mean like disability related academic accommodations, disability related accommodations. That's another key, a very important key topic area that we talk with students about individually. So I mentioned how important it is that we have individualized study abroad advising for students. And this is the exact kind of thing that we want to talk to students about from early on, that we hope students would disclose to us is that they have certain accommodation needs. And by the way, at AU, there's also a specific support office, the Academic Support and Access Center, ASAC, which our office works with very closely, where students would also get advising and guidance from that support office about their accommodations. And then typically what would happen is we would get some accommodations related documentation from the Disability Support Office at AU, ASAC. And then we would then work with the student to really kind of liaise with the program staff and the student to make sure that students understand how they can request and or apply for similar accommodations on that abroad program. So some abroad programs are offer are like for example our AU centers in Brussels, Madrid, and Nairobi. A lot of programs that are more structured and designed for American students. The very largely the same kinds of accommodations can be done abroad, right? But other locations, other universities, different countries have different rules and regulations in terms of accommodations. So there might be a situation where a student might have to like, and again, we would be helping with them this as far as how they do it. But let's say they want to study abroad in Scotland at the University of Edinburgh. University of Edinburgh has their own kind of approval process, application process to request accommodations. So we would work with the student and the program staff there at Edinburgh about here's how you do that, and make sure the student understands how they can apply for these accommodations. And oftentimes similar accommodations can be made, but not always. There can be accommodations just depending on the location and what the student's needs are. Some accommodations may just not be possible at certain locations, or um, just may not be part of the law, part of the rules there in that country, for example. So it really is very much a kind of student by student, program by program, location by location type discussion. And that's something we want to make sure to help students with from day one. So that's definitely part of the advising we would do with students.
Uh, when do first year students start receiving information about studying abroad?
Probably pretty much from day one. So they're probably hearing about study abroad very early on. So within like the first week or two of the semester, we have various AU abroad info sessions and tabling events going on. And then every September, usually it's the third week in September, we have our big study abroad fair. And this is something we heavily promote to first year students because it's a great chance. They're here at AU, they've been here for like 2 or 3 weeks. They're excited about learning about study abroad. Come to our fair where it's a big event. We have tables for all the different programs. We'll have like alumni there who just got back from abroad to share about their experiences. We'll have representatives from some programs there as well. So yeah, so there's stuff going on at the start of every semester, basically. A lot of these kinds of events and tabling and affairs. Um, and first year students, a lot of that is very much targeted towards first year students. So yeah, we want first year students to really be excited about study abroad and thinking about study abroad early on. Even if they can't maybe make any decisions just yet for a while, or they're not going to study abroad for a little while yet, they can definitely start
Ethan, I'm
thinking
sure
about it.
your office is attending New Eagle Day on Sunday, so they can definitely find you there.
Yeah,
Um,
I actually will be there. So I'll be giving a talk at New Eagle on Sunday. So if I happen to see all of you any of you there, that'd be great.
yes. Here's another question. How does housing on campus work for students in their residence hall in the fall, but studying abroad in the spring? Do you only pay for housing for one semester, and does your student's roommate get assigned a new roommate?
Good question. So yeah, basically, indeed, when a student does a study abroad, an AU abroad program, they would not have to pay AU housing and dining, meal plan fees, right? So those would be eventually canceled and waived. What we typically tell students to do is students should still basically sign up for AU housing for the next academic year like they normally would, right? And then later on, once they get confirmed and accepted to their study abroad, AU abroad program and they commit to it, then at that point, students can cancel their AU housing for, like you said, like for example, the fall semester, and for no, there won't be any penalty or cancellation fee. But when they cancel their fall housing, it's just made clear that they still want their housing for when they get back in the spring. So yeah, so there is that. The AU Housing Office works with students all the time about this because as you can imagine, so many students study abroad that there's no expectation that students have to, if they sign up for the AU housing for the whole year, they have to pay for the whole year. If it's when they study abroad for that semester, they would waive and cancel the AU housing and dining fees for that semester they're abroad. And as far as how the roommates get reassigned, that's kind of more of a it's
Housing
kind of a case,
question.
yeah, more of a housing question, kind of a case by case situation as far as just how it works for that specific room or dorm. That's something housing works out. Yeah.
And then on the opposite end of that question, we have several questions asking, how does housing work when they study abroad? Will they be staying in residence halls at, the guest institution? Or I
Nope.
think you alluded to like maybe them finding their own housing accommodations off campus.
This as well as where there's a big range of options. I would say, in general, for most programs, right, there's going to be program arranged housing of some kind, right? So the vast majority of programs we have, right, 90% of our programs are going to have some kind of program arranged housing. For a lot of the host institutions abroad, that probably is going to be dormitories on campus, right? For some of our other programs, some of those, like our AU Center program in Madrid or Brussels, there might be homestay options, for example. Or there might be some programs might have program arranged apartments. So students are living together with in special program run apartments with other students on the program with them. So it's typically going to be program arranged housing of some kind. That could be dorm, that could be apartments, that could be homestay, some range like that, really just case by case depending on the program itself. There are a small number of programs we have where housing might have to be arranged, the student might have to arrange their own housing, but that's rare. I mean, that's in situations, for example, where for certain universities overseas, their on-campus dorm housing might be very limited. So some students aren't successful in getting a dorm placement, and so they have to find off-campus private housing on their own. And in which case, the university, for example, would give resources on how to do that and guidance on that. But that's very rare. I mean, like I said, 90% of our programs, it's program arranged housing of some kind.
And then for our last question, can you talk a little bit about the internship process when studying abroad? Are students arranging their own internships studying abroad, or do they need to be worried about work visas when they're doing an internship abroad? Could you just expand on that a little bit more?
Absolutely. And I saw one of the questions was about what about internship opportunities where if someone's studying abroad at a university, one of the university programs, for example, like John Cabot in Rome. And yeah, so basically the if a program has an internship option as part of the program, it's arranged for the student by the program. And it's typically going to be a credit bearing part of the program. So that's why it's not, so as someone very rightly pointed out, there are work visa related issues, right? So basically when students do an internship as part of their AU Broad program, it's for academic credit and therefore it's considered part of the academic program. So that does not run afoul with work visa related complications, right? Students would still just enter the country as a student like normal on a student visa, and they're doing a 3 credit internship as part of their experience, right? Um, and again, it really varies by program. And on our website, we actually have in our like our search criteria, you could search programs by every program that has an internship component. So you could do a search that way, for example. And most of those programs are indeed structured style programs like our centers in Brussels, Madrid, and Nairobi, but not exclusively. So, as the person who asked the question correctly pointed out, John Cabot University in Rome, which technically speaking is that more direct enrollment university model style program, they in fact actually also offer an internship option for study abroad students as well. So it's not it's not entirely out of the ordinary where that might happen, where you have some programs that will have an internship component that may not be at our centers or be a structured style program in some cases.
All right. So we're right on 8 p.m. To respect everyone's time, we're going to stop questions there. However, if you have any continued questions, I'm sure Ethan is more than happy to answer them, or you can contact the AU Abroad office and get those questions answered. I just want to go ahead and thank Ethan once again for the wonderful presentation and the diligence in answering those questions. And with that, we hope that you have a great night, and maybe we'll see some of you at New Eagle Day on Sunday, March 1st.
I
All
hope
right,
so.
take it.
And again, if there are any questions that we didn't get to, please feel free to email our office with those questions, and I'll be happy to get back to you separately.
All righty. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone. Thanks again.